Hey, what's happening here?
Synchronicity!
So what's your podcast about?
Oh, it's about psychology, true crime, supernatural stuff, the occasional paranormal or philosophical rant.
Well, maybe I could check it out sometime.
And if you're smart enough, you learn from your mistakes. You figure it out. You think, you realize that life isn't some elaborate stage play with directions for the actors. It's chaos personified.
But the question of coincidences or synchronicity, this domain of experience, is fundamental.
But every shadow, no matter how deep, is threatened by morning light.
This is your nautical lantern on the dangerous seas of darkness. Let's push off from the placid shore of the status quo and explore what's beyond the horizon. I am your host, BT, and this is Truth and Shadow, your podcast of the supernatural.
They call it coincidence. That's the polite word for it, a neat little box to bury the experience so it doesn't keep you awake at night. You're walking down the street, thinking of someone you haven't spoken to in years, and your phone lights up with their name. The dream leaks into the waking world when the same image appears the next day on a billboard or is mentioned in a passing conversation. Numbers repeat, events line up, all with impossible timing. And something deep inside of you whispers, this means something. But the rational world, the world of probabilities and statistics, insists it's nothing more than chance. Billions of variables bounce around, and every so often two of them line up. Don't take it personally, they will tell you. Don't project your mind onto the void. And yet we do. Every culture and every era has. Coincidences carry the same sense, like omens. They feel like whispers from the hidden architecture of reality. They are not just events, they are messages. And if they are messages, someone or something is speaking. The psychologists have a word for it. Synchronicity. Not mere chance, but meaningful coincidence. A pattern stitched between the inner world of the psyche and the outer world of events. Synchronicities are not bound by cause and effect in the ordinary sense. They are causal bridges, like stepping stones across the river that separates thought from matter. And yet, once you start paying attention, you realize the river is never still. We live in an age of probability. If it can't be measured, it doesn't exist. If it can't be reduced to cause and effect, it's discarded as static. The modern mind is a great filter designed to protect us from the unbearable thought that life is more than equations. But every so often, the filter slips, the veil cracks, and we see, however briefly, that the fabric of the world is not stitched together by logic alone. That's when coincidences arrive. Think of this moment. You're lost, confused, maybe even desperate. You do something simple. You turn on the radio, and the lyrics that spill through the speakers describe your life as if the singer had been following you around in secret. Or you open a book at random, and the sentence on the page speaks directly to the wound you've been nursing in silence. What are the odds? Too high? I don't know. It seems to me that something more than chance has occurred. And here's the unsettling part. It happens often enough to feel like it has been designed. Like a conspiracy running beneath ordinary time, a cosmic trickster, if you will, rearranging the furniture of the universe when you aren't looking. Well, the psyche itself doesn't deal in probabilities. It deals in meaning, in images. And meaning is heavier than math. When we encounter synchronicity, it's not the improbability that pierces our mind, it's the weight of the meaning involved. It's the sense that an unseen hand has just brushed against our souls. The unconscious mind speaks in symbols, into slips of the tongue, creates fantasy, leaks into myth, but sometimes the unconscious climbs outside. It rearranges events in the outer world to mirror the landscape within. That's what a synchronicity is. The inside and the outside dancing in tandem. You think of a friend before the call. The dream shows you the symbol before the world mentions it. The number repeats because your unconscious is trying to hold your attention just long enough for you to notice the signal. This is why ancient cultures treated coincidences as omens. Not because they misunderstood probability, but because they understood the psyche. They knew the world was not a dead machine, but a living thing. They were searching for truth in the turning of the heavens, in the call of birds and the cracks of the fire. And they knew that truth often wears a cloak of shadow. Of course, the skeptical voice whispers back, this is apophenia, the human tendency to see patterns where none exist. Clouds shaped like animals, faces in the burn marks of toast. Messages and records played backwards. And yes, that's part of it, but we are pattern-seeking creatures. But is it so wrong to ask why? Why should evolution give us a mind wired to find meaning in chaos? If chaos is all there is. The skeptic shrugs, the mystic smiles, and the one caught in the middle, someone like you, hesitates, wondering which path is safer. Dismissal or surrender? Dismissal offers the comfort of control. Everything is random, nothing is meant. But that comfort fades when the coincidences multiply, and you start to feel like you're being followed, not by a stalker in the shadows, by some untold story itself. Surrender, on the other hand, invites the danger, because once you start treating coincidences as messages, you open yourself up to obsession. You can fall into paranoia, seeing omens' importance in every headline, every overheard phrase, every flicker of a streetlight. The line between revelation and madness is a hair's breadth thick. And yet, ignoring the signals feels like betrayal. Betrayal of the truth you've glimpsed. Betrayal of the shadow that insists it has something to teach you. Well, the truth is, if there is one, it might be this. Synchronicity is not about control, it's about encounter. It's not there to tell you the lottery numbers or the date of your death. It's there to remind you that the universe is stranger than you admit, and that you are more entangled with it than you imagine. When you pay attention to synchronicity, you are not reading fate like a timetable. You are entering dialogue with mystery. The coincidence is the question in your life. Your life becomes the answer. Think of it like a chessboard. Every move you make ripples across the board, even if you don't see the consequences right away. Now imagine if the board moves in response on its own. That's a synchronicity, the uncanny sense that the world has moved its piece in response to yours. That means it's not prediction, it's not fortune telling, it's participation. It's stepping into the tension between the truth and the shadow, where every move means more than it should. And this is where the shadow creeps in, because if coincidences can carry meaning, then meaning itself is unstable. It's no longer confined to the sacred spaces of dreams, myths, or even ritual. It bleeds into traffic lights, overheard arguments, accidents, slips of the tongue. The sacred leaks into the mundane. Some in the world of esotericism knows this. They've known it for a long time. They call it correspondences. Eliphas Levi used the word as above, so below. The microcosm reflects in the macrocosm, and events mirror the soul. To them, a synchronicity wasn't an accident. It's some kind of revelation, a ritual performed by reality itself. And if that's true, who's performing the ritual? What hand writes the truth in our days? And what unseen architect hides it in shadow? You can try to answer with science. Quantum entanglement, acausal connections, the fabric of space-time bending in ways we don't yet understand. Or you can answer it the human way, with myth, the gods, the archetypes, the hidden hand of destiny. Or you can accept the answer is neither, or both. But you can't deny the phenomenon, because the moment you do, the next coincidence arrives and it stares back at you, daring you to ignore it again. Think of the times it's happened to you. The song, the phone call, the symbol that followed you through a season of life like a shadow that refused to detach. These are not abstractions. They are the fingerprints of something we can identify. And if you're honest, you'll admit they changed you, not always in ways you can explain, but in ways you can feel. That's the true power of synchronicity. Not prediction, not proof, but transformation. When it happens, you are forced to acknowledge that your psyche and the world are speaking the same language. And in that moment, you are no longer a detached observer. You are a participant in the mystery. So what do we do with all of this? Well, we can listen carefully, not obsessively, not with any kind of paranoia, but with an honest dose of humility. We accept that meaning is not confined to logic and that coincidence is not always noise. Sometimes coincidence is the knock at the door, the question asked by the universe, are you paying attention? And maybe the answer is simple. Maybe it's enough to say yes. There are those who argue that synchronicities are proof of something larger, proof of the divine, proof of fate, proof of an intelligence that threads itself through time. And maybe they're right. Look, proof isn't the point. Point is the moment you realize that your life is not sealed off from the world, that the psyche bleeds outward and the world, reality, bleeds in. Yeah, it's terrifying. It's also exhilarating, but it's very sacred. And it's going to leave you with the inescapable sense that reality is not a cold machine, but a living conversation. In the end, we can call it synchronicity, we can call it madness or miracle, but whatever we name it, the phenomena remains. The hidden order winks at us from behind the curtain, daring us to notice. And if you're still listening, if you're still awake to it, then you already know. The coincidences are not accidents. They are invitations. They are the handwriting of truth traced in shadow.
Sky fades, white into gray. Echoes fall, then slip away. Nothing stays the same.
Some people say coincidence is nothing more than chance, a random glitch in the shuffle of the universe's deck. But every now and then, something happens that feels tailored. A meeting you couldn't have planned, a warning whispered through the threads of time, a door that opens precisely when you reach for the handle. Are these lucky breaks of the chaotic cosmos? Or are they hints, carefully placed breadcrumbs meant to lead us somewhere? My guest today doesn't just believe in coincidence, he studies them. He is the first psychiatrist since Carl Jung to systematically explore synchronicity and serendipity. In his memoir, Life-Changing Synchronicities, he traces the moments that shape his life, moments that suggest the universe may be more than a conversation than a machine. We'll talk about the science, the mystery, and the meaning behind these improbable events, and why recognizing them might just change the way you move through the world. This is not just about patterns in the stars, it's about patterns in you. And when the pattern calls your name, you'd better be ready to listen. He is the coincidence conspirator, the serendipity sleuth, the synchronicity shadowcaster. Dr. Beitman, welcome to Truth and Shadow Podcast.
Yeah. Thanks, Brandon. Glad to be here with you, and I'm glad we got some good stuff from my book to be able to talk about.
Absolutely, yes. Your book, Life-Changing Synchronicities, is well worth the read. And I wanted to basically start with, can you talk to the audience about who you are and some of your academic professional history?
It's fun to be asked, who am I? It's a little bit like the caterpillar on top of the mushroom in Alice in Wonderland, who says, "Who are you?" And that's what your question reminds me of, but I'll try to give you a conventional answer, but I still don't know who I am. I'm still having fun trying to really get to that thing, but I think it's an ongoing process for all of us, that we keep what Jung called individuating, and the individuation process doesn't stop. You just keep developing. And it's not very well known that Jung, who came up with the idea of synchronicity, was able to say, and rightly so, that he is not fully individuated. It just keeps going, and it's part of the roller coaster ride of being a human. Well, that's a little bit about me, but there are various segments of my life which are described, which I describe in the book. The first major coincidences happened when I was 8 or 9, involved my dog. We each got lost and we found each other. And that was a major, major turning point for me, because I loved that puppy and he loved me. And we both got lost. And there we were. Hi. He jumped up on my leg as I was riding my bike in his direction and said, "I think, where have you been?" So we went home, and that was the start of it. I didn't have any name for it. I just had a feeling about it. It was like this was my buddy, and I had lost him, and somehow there he was. So it illustrates a very, very important idea for our listeners, that we have something like fish do, and like some birds do, and other animals. We know how to get to where we need to go, but for humans, we don't know how we do it. But it's as if we have this internal GPS, just like in your car, and you get to where you need to be. And I was crying a lot before I met him again. I saw him again. And crying is an illustration of getting disoriented in the present. And when you start getting disoriented in the present, coincidences are more likely to happen, because you're not following the usual way of structuring the world the way we have been told to. So that was my first one. And then I had a bunch in elementary school that are in there. How I walked into a new school in 6th grade and became president of the student council. That was a funny one. And then in high school, I played a lot of football and baseball, and I won the batting title because a new coach showed up right on time to teach me how to bunt, to drag bunt, as we called it. So I was fast and could bunt, and I'd fool the third baseman each time. And he thought I was going to swing. I didn't. So I won the batting title as a result of getting 7 bunts out of 17 hits and hitting .486. And then I showed up at the right place at the right time for a scout for the Pittsburgh Pirates to invite me and my buddy, Tom Payton, to go to a tryout camp. So it didn't work out very well. I'm glad it didn't. But it's a good story about going to a Pittsburgh Pirates tryout camp, actually being scouted. Now, when I went to college, it was a small college, and there were a lot of coincidences on the football field. But one that was off the football field was really an amazing one for me then, and still is kind of now. It happened on a Wednesday evening. I was coming out of the DuPont Library at Swarthmore. The week before, we had played Johns Hopkins at Johns Hopkins, and I had made 3 touchdowns and got the 4th one called back. So that was one of my best games ever. And so when I walked out of DuPont Library in the evening after studying on that Wednesday night, I got paranoid. I thought some guys were after me. And I went around the side of the library to see if there's anybody there. There wasn't anybody there, but I said, well, wait a minute. So I was able to just walk away and go back to my dormitory. And then on Saturday, we were playing our arch rivals. These were the guys that were the real men. They went to Pennsylvania Military College, so they were the men, and we were the squeaky smart guys up the street about 3 miles. And so it was a battle of the tough guys and the smart guys. And I go out to wide receiver. I didn't expect that. The coach called the play, and I'm out there hanging around waiting for the play to get called, get the ball to get snapped, and I hear these guys on the PMC side saying, "Beitman's out here, Beitman's out here," so that my feeling of being paranoid was actually correct. They were probably running plays where they were pretending one of their guys was me. So they were out to get me because I had played such a good game the week before. So that's a precognition, or actually it's kind of like clairvoyance carried forward, because I could feel something about what they were doing at the time, and then it turned out a bit to be a prediction of something that actually happened. So that's me with football. There's other ones in college, but I thought maybe I'd stop here and see what you had to say.
Sure. Yeah, I think it's important for us to frame this concept because we know that Carl Jung himself viewed synchronicity as a casual connecting principle. And in your work, in this book specifically, you seem to move past the definition and into the lived experience like you've just shared. Where do you feel Jung's original framing is still useful, and where have you had to expand or depart from it?
The most useful thing he did was to describe it. One of his followers, Anne-Marie France, said it's probably his most important contribution. The book came out called Synchronicity, an acausal connecting principle, came out toward the end of his life because he was afraid people would call him crazy, which is what happened to me when I was a resident in psychiatry. One of my colleagues said, "Bernie, all this talk about synchronicity and meaningful coincidence and stuff, that means you're crazy. It means you're psychotic. You need help." Well, I went on to be chairman of a psychiatry department, I guess, and I'm still walking around writing books, so I think he was wrong. And the important thing there is that you can be tuned into meaningful coincidences and not be psychotic. And that's one of the messages that I'm trying to deliver to psychiatry and the mental health professions in general. So Jung's contribution was the courage to say that, hey, baby, this stuff's happening out here. It's happening. I got a bunch of them, and I'm writing them down here. And it's something worth studying. So he made a little bit of a classification of it. And what I've done is in a book called Meaningful Coincidences, How and Why Synchronicity and Serendipity Happen, developed a taxonomy, categories for meaningful coincidences. And the reason that's important is that's the beginning of a science when you start making categories. So I began to ask a question. Well, okay, Bernie, it happened to you, happened to Jung, probably happens to other people, but really you don't know that. So when I was chairman of psychiatry at the University of Missouri, I, with research assistants, developed the Weird Coincidence Survey to try to answer the question about how frequent these things are. When I get on these podcasts, I say, look, what's the most common coincidence? And they always say, thinking of someone and they call you, especially if you hadn't heard from them in a long time. And that's what our data showed, that was one of the most common coincidences. So I was able to demonstrate the basic idea that Jung described something that was a common occurrence among normal people. That's a very important idea. And that's, how I knew that, but I had to prove it. And I supported that idea with that work. And that Jung needed that kind of data-based research, pretty simple survey. They're not easy to make, those surveys. It took a lot of doing it right with the research assistants, but it was the first reliable and valid scale for measuring coincidence frequency.
Yeah, I was just thinking, as you were talking there, the one that really, the coincidence that I actually see a lot, and this is probably something, is usually when you're thinking about or talking about buying a certain something and then you start seeing advertisements for it, or and I don't mean just on your phone device, because we know that they seem to be listening. I mean like billboards. Like you might have been thinking about getting something and you drive past a billboard that's advertising it.
Yeah, that happens. And you rightly refer to algorithms that see what you were doing something with on social media and what you're interested in. And they say, hey, Brandon, here's a great inexpensive Audi you can buy since you're interested in those. That happens all the time. So differentiating those is really important. And when you talk about a billboard, keep in mind that we have this tendency to find what we're looking for. So because you had in mind to buy a certain thing, you were more apt to see something that represented it. It's an important part of the biases that we bring to coincidences. If it's like a rare thing for that billboard to be around, or you went in a way that you hadn't gone before, then you're talking about stuff that's pretty cool.
Yeah, because in your book, there's something that seems to be called like the coincidence radar, right? Where you describe moments that seem to call you into paying attention as if your awareness itself is part of that event. And so basically we get this coincidence radar that develops, and without falling into some kind of, without falling into seeing patterns everywhere, even when there's nothing, how do we determine that?
Well, let me ask you how you do it, Brandon. We'll start with you.
It's a very good question. So usually, like you said, if I'm going somewhere that I always take the same route, usually subconsciously we're quite aware of normal signs that are on our path. So normal things that we see every single day outside the periphery. Billboards for hot tubs, billboards for cars, billboards for McDonald's or whatever. But if I'm taking a route that's completely different, or I feel like this seems like I feel like going this way in my car, and I go this way, and then I happen to see a sign for anything. It's only going to get better from here, or something like that, and I really felt down, and I may have needed to see that sign, and I've never driven past that church before or whatever.
Yeah, I know a guy who was having to decide whether to move or not. So he looks up and he sees a truck go by saying, "It's time to move."
Yeah.
The point of all this at this time in our discussion is that a fundamental teaching of meaningful coincidences is that our minds are much more connected to our environments than we have been led to believe. What do you think of that, baby?
Well, due to the fact that I've been researching and studying quite a bit of Jungian psychology, the collective unconscious is typically what I would come to with that.
Well, the collective unconscious is a whole nother, let me say, bag of worms or kettle of fish.
Sure.
People have made so many different aspersions to it, so many different interpretations. They're often used in tarot cards of various kinds because they're archetypes, and the archetypes are one of the favorite Jungian unconscious ideas. And unfortunately, a lot of writing about archetypes is writing about the archetypes that Jung came up with. And he came up with it in a very nice scientific way. He just kept hearing psychotic patients telling him the same stories. And then he saw across culture that there was the mother image, the magician image, the emperor, otherwise king one, the hermit, looking the seeker, which the hermit is sometimes thought of as, and many more. What gets ignored a lot of times when people are listing all the family-like things of the archetypes is Jung's most important one. The second most important one is the shadow, and that's being used now in common language now. It's really gotten popular, and it's a really important one to keep in mind, that we have this, oh, I'm so nice, so things are so great, and everything. Well, underneath there's pretty much the opposite, and paying attention to how nice you are covers over the opposite about how not so nice you are or angry you are. So that's probably the second most important archetype. But the most important one, at least from my sense, is the self, and that is with a capital S, self. The self. Now, I got confused by that. I mean, small s, big S, what's the big deal?
Right.
Why are they so different just because you capitalize one and the other one you don't? So what do you think of the capital S, self, Brandon?
Well, I mean, my thoughts on the capital S, self, is trying to, I'm going to just use some lingo, basically the archetype of wholeness. So the wholeness idea of integrating the conscious and the unconscious. And so basically, if I think about some of these ideas, specifically like from your book, it would be like these synchronicities seem to feel like messages from the capital S, self. And so they surface in these outer events, what unconsciousness is trying to bring forward into our conscious life. And that's what I've been looking at in these moments of the inner world breaking into the outer world.
Great. I mean, I'm glad you made that explicit. I hadn't known what you thought about the mind connected to environment thing. So that's a beautiful explanation of it, Brandon, about how the unconscious gets projected out for you to be able to see a mirror of what's in your mind that maybe you don't want to see. Very good. Very good. Good to hear that.
So if I move on to another question for you here, specifically when we're looking at your book, one of the most gripping aspects of life-changing synchronicities is how personal your stories are. Was there a single event that moved coincidence from an intellectual curiosity to something you knew you had to explore professionally?
It never started out as an intellectual thing. I can't tell you how emotionally important finding my dog was, and for him to find me. That emotion is a key part of meaningful coincidences. Usually the more intense the emotion, the more meaning there is for your personal life. And finding Snapper and him finding me was like, that was a life-changing one right away, 8 or 9 right away. And I could see other ones later that were kind of interesting. And I describe them in the book, but they're kind of like, okay, that's fun, or that's interesting. But the other one that really made an impact on me was when I was age 31, San Francisco, in a kitchen at 11 p.m., I was choking uncontrollably. I'd never choked like that before, and I haven't since. And I don't know how long it lasted, but it seemed like it would go on forever. And then it ended. That's 11 p.m. San Francisco time. My brother called the next day to tell me that our father, Carl Beitman, had died at 2 a.m. East Coast time. And that was the same time I was choking. More than that, he had bled into his throat. So he choked on his own blood around the same time I was choking uncontrollably. So that was very important to me, because I said, what is going on here? There's got to be some relationship that is yet to be explored between the choking events 3,000 miles away. Those two, and my father was the one who brought Snapper home when I needed a dog desperately. So my father and synchronicity are very much tied with each other. And that's love. That's love. My father loved me, and I loved him. And there I could feel and experience a terrible experience, a dying experience, a shared death experience that my father was also having. That was emotional enough for you, Brandon?
Oh yeah, that's good. I mean, it seems to be in this memoir of yours that these synchronicities can come in moments of upheaval or grief. And so do you think that these crises amplify our openness to these events?
I like guys who ask questions who know the answer to them, as you just did. It's one of the funny things about doing these things. I'm saying, oh yes, Brandon.
Of course.
Of course. I mean, one of the points I try to make in that book is that in crisis, there is opportunity, and it comes in the form of meaningful coincidences sometimes. The crisis of losing my dog, the crisis of my father dying, a lot of other times during transition, high emotion, the death of a loved one is one of the big ones, where you see synchronicities, the really needing a job, and somehow the right person shows up to offer you one. These are not 100% anythings, but it's some of these low probability events. And you kind of referred to probability earlier. One of the distinguishing characteristics of meaningful coincidences is their low probability, is that And people put it in terms like, what are the chances of that? And kind of do that. Well, what they're saying is the probability of those two events coming together is pretty low. And I have this idea, it's not 100% at all, that the lower the probability, the higher the meaning for you personally, and the higher the meaning about how reality works. Because those are the two primary meanings of meaningful coincidences, is what it means to you in your life story, and what it means to you about how reality works. A lot of people say it's the universe, and I say, okay, I don't argue with that anymore. I just say the universe is pretty large, and what does it have to do with me? But what they're referring to is something very much like God intervening in their lives. So I'm trying to make an explanations that are at least more earthbound than those.
Yeah, it was for Carl Jung, individuation was that process of becoming your true self, the capital S we talked about earlier, and integrating all those parts of your psyche. So do you think that coincidences can actively guide that process? Basically like a compass pointing us toward where we're meant to be?
Yeah, you got the right answer to that one, Brandon. But I'll say, yeah, you're right. It does. You just said very articulately that your subconscious, unconscious is trying to talk to you by projecting stuff from your inner world outside. It's a mirror of your mind, and that's an important idea. And so it's nice to have mirrors of your mind, and they come in different forms. One of them is in psychotherapy, where the therapist mirrors back to you feelings and thoughts or images that the therapist picks up that you're not quite aware of. One of the more interesting versions of that is the people that you hang around with. Some of the people that you hang around with are going through some of the same stuff that you are. And in a very specific way, there's some pretty interesting research that suggests the patients of psychotherapists, and this research is about the first session with a new patient. There's lots of stories in this work, in this paper, about how the patient reflects a lot of what the therapist has been going through and is currently paying attention to and trying to evolve. So these are different ways in which the unconscious gets projected out. And I mean, I was told by a Jungian when I was a resident in psychiatry, your problems walk into your office. I like that one because it's true. Not always, and you got to be discriminating. You got to figure out which ones fit, and you can't overdo it and you can't underdo it. And that's part of what I think you were asking earlier.
Now, have you built a platform for people to share their coincidence stories?
Yeah, it's called The Coincidence Project, all one word, thecoincidenceproject.net. And there's a place to put your stories. And we get hundreds of them in there. And I invite you to put your stories there, and you may get some comments, you may not, I don't know, but at least you have them recorded someplace where some of us can see them.
Yeah, and then the other thing is in this book, you really encourage people to keep a coincidence diary. So beyond recording these events, is there a practice you found that actually increases the frequency or depth of synchronicities?
It's called meditation.
Let's unpack that.
Well, we can't unpack it because people have different names for different ideas about what a meditation is. But it's the same idea of what happens when you let go of the current structure of reality and let your mind float around. And that's the practice that leads you to be more fluid in your ability to perceive what's around you in a way that connects to you. Different ways of meditating, different rules about it. There's so many different ways of doing it. It's the idea of activating your self-observer. Each of us has one, whether they know it or not. Some people don't want to use them very much. I am encouraging people to recognize their own self-observer, because that self-observer is what gets activated in the simple forms of meditation, which is when you get into a meditative state and then some thoughts start coming in. Then this witnessing capacity says, I'll just let go of those thoughts. I'll just let go of the thought. It's the witnessing, knowing, seeing, and letting go that is a way of describing the self-observer, which meditation helps to strengthen. But there are other ways to do it. Some of us have taken psychedelics, LSD, psilocybin. Mescaline's not so popular these days. It lasts a long time. And now we got these short ones of DMT, dimethyltryptamine, and we got even shorter one called 5-MeO, which is a derivative of dimethyltryptamine. And each of these breaks your brain away from what is called the default mode network, which is this is Brandon part of your brain. Brandon does the podcast. Brandon goes home. Brandon does this when he's at home. This is who people think Brandon is. That's your definition of yourself, which you need. That's the ego that is not a bad thing. People like slam the ego. No, you need to have a way of interacting with the world. And the ego, as Freud made pretty clear, and his daughter Anna Freud made even more clear, is necessary to mediate between your unconscious, your subconscious, even your conscious mind, and external reality. Your ego can say, I go, ego, I go. So you need something to make your interaction with the world effective. But what we use ego now as primarily, as my younger son said to me one time, Papa's got a big ego. I did. He was right, but by that he meant an exaggerated something, an inflated sense of self. But basically, ego is like getting along in the world. And what we mentioned earlier, I mentioned psychedelics. Man, you can see a lot of coincidences if you're taking some acid and some weed sometimes too. And in my book, as you saw, I was a part-time hippie on Haight Street while I was a resident in psychiatry. And so there were so many of them, I could only remember some. And I had to tell myself, don't get blown out by all of these. But that was the evidence, that personal experience was the evidence of having lots of these coincidences.
And when we're looking at this, we have this idea of the self-observer. Can you talk about who the self-observer is in relation to the ego?
Well, there is a psychoanalytic term called the observing ego. I mean, I call it self-observer because it's not using the kind of loaded word ego. And the self-observer or the ego develops the self-observer or the ego observer to mediate between the self and the environments. You've got to look at what you're thinking and what you're feeling and what you're imagining in different circumstances and integrate that information into decision making. So the observing ego is the observing self, but I've divided the observing self up more than the observing ego because I think it has three parts. three functions, the ego, I mean, the observing self. One of them is to dispassionately observe, which is what people learn in meditation. Another part of that is, oh, look, there's something to be analyzed here. There's a pattern here. Okay, Brandon is seeing a connection between a billboard and what he's going to buy. So there's an analyzing function that connects two observations. Then, as with the guy, it's time to move, seeing a van when he's thinking about moving, that was enough to get him to finally decide to move. So there's a decision-making element to the observing ego, in addition to analytical and activating.
Something that caught my eye when I was flipping through and reading is the concept of the library angel.
Yeah.
And I like how you say, well, in 68, there wasn't any internet, so we couldn't really apply it. But let's go ahead and talk about this, this idea that you have, this library angel, and then how it works today.
Well, you mean the internet angel now, but the library angel was what we might refer to as far out and groovy, which for some people is like they walk into a library or a bookstore and this book is shining. It's got a light on it. For other people, they're looking for some information and a book falls off the shelf and there's what they've been looking for in a disorganized library. So stuff happens. For me, again, in the book is when I was in college, I was bored studying in our library. So I went down in what were called the stacks back then, where books that weren't upstairs were housed. And I was wandering along and I saw this green and white book. It said, I was drawn to it. I mean, this is what Library Angel is. And it turned out to be a book by George Kelly, an Ohio State psychologist whose major contribution to me, but he did more than just to me, was a person's processes are psychologically channelized by the way they anticipate events. So I shortened that. It's kind of long. So I shortened that to expectation influences experience, which you all kind of know, but it became much more of a watchword for me after reading that. So then I'd go to Stanford to be interviewed for a residency position there. And the guy interviewing me is another psychiatrist, Fred Melgis, says, what books have you been reading lately? Well, psychiatric residency, you say Freud or something. I said, A Theory of Personality by George Kelly. He would have fallen off his chair if he could have. He just kind of froze and looked at me and said, my research is based on George Kelly's research. Well, that got me into the residency. I mean, that's a wonderful coincidence. That's a library angel one. You're now talking about the internet angel. And you got to be really careful about internet angels. Because as you referred to earlier, Brendan, it was like sometimes they're just lining you up to buy something because they just saw you. But there are times when we do this thing called Googling, or we do this thing like scrolling. And I like to scroll TikTok. I got a couple of my own videos on there, on reels on TikTok. I like to scroll it every once in a while. And man, right there is something I can use in the book I'm currently writing. I mean, it's amazing. It's there, and somebody says what I need, and I write it in my email to myself as something to incorporate in the book that I'm currently doing.
No, that's really interesting. Earlier, you had mentioned, Jung's view of the tarot being, archetypical ideas. And a lot of people have written commentaries on tarot. I mean, you've got Lon Milo Duquette
has written extensively on Crowley's Thoth deck. And then even something like the I Ching, who, speaking of Crowley, Aleister Crowley wrote quite a commentary on the I Ching. What do you view these?
Well, that's a nice coincidence, Brandon, because I studied the Book of Thoth very deeply before the printed book came out. I just had the cards that I cut out of a mimeograph piece of paper, or like kind of cardboardy, and put them in a deck form, and sat in a basement in the Berkeley Hills under a light, lamplight, and just looked at the cards without having a description of them. And I looked at not just the image, like the Fool is the first one. The Hanged Man is number 12, which was one of my favorites. And I'd look at the astrological sign that was associated with each one. The Hanged Man was associated with water, which is not exactly an astrological sign, but certainly is all part of fire, water, air, and earth. It had a Hebrew letter associated with it and a number. And I would try to put the image together with the astrological sign and the number and the name, and try to see how they were connected with each other. So it was a way of learning experience, making myself put disparate things together in a potentially meaningful way. Jung didn't get into Tarot as far as I know, but he wrote the preface to Wilhelm's translation of the I Ching from the Chinese. He was doing a lot of I Ching before that, based on a not such good translation, and he was so happy to get Wilhelm's description, so he could do it more easily. I think sometimes he did it every day. He threw the coins, and you come up with two different. You come up with threes, three on top and three on the bottom, and together they create an idea, an ideogram. Some people might call it. But the funny thing is about that, it's really just 64 of those I Ching lines and broken lines. There's only 64 of them, and they lead you to one of 64 chapters in the book, the I Ching. So it's not unlike opening some holy book or some other book randomly and trying to come up with something. The thing about the I Ching, as my good friend and colleague Mary Kay Landon knows, there's a lot of going on with those I Ching, man. I mean, it doesn't get happy in the U.S. We just like the tarot cards better. Could stay away from those Chinese things. It's got three like millennial history going way back, and they were using various things like tortoise shells to predict the future, because you can find in randomness, you can find order. And that was the idea of the tarot and the I Ching, is you can find order by tossing the coins or the yarrow sticks and find the chapter and translate the chapter to apply to what you're doing now. The originals were about how to do war. So that's still underneath that. But Mary Kay, who's a wonderful person, she's been on my own podcast a couple of times. You could find her. She is in contact with the I Ching guys. She has a relationship with them. And it's kind of funny to hear her talk about them, but they're very much a part of her way of being. So the I Ching is different, but the I Ching is based on yin yang, around two things, yes or no, plus or minus. Well, the tarot cards are usually based on 10, not all of them, that got changed, but the Crowley deck is based on 10, which is based on the Kabbalah, which has 10 Sephiroth. So you get duality and the 10 and the Zohar Hebrew, the Hebrew idea of mysticism come together, and Crowley had made this little book where he showed the relationship between the I Ching and tarot cards.
Yeah, I do believe a document of that is in his big book, Liber 4, the book 4.
Oh, you really know this guy pretty well.
Right.
You do.
I was
goody.
an esotericist for some time. And so, when we look at, I had it on my mind, Crowley's 777 and other Kabbalistic writings. That was just in my head. So it's a really good Excel sheet, basically, that shows all of the all the symbols and attributes of a given thing in line. Right.
Yeah.
When we look, and this is horrible. I probably shouldn't shift gears, but I do want to. Is what do we do? What can we take away with the difference between what you call or what is called a psychosis versus a synchronicity? What can we work with that?
I have a paper, a little paper submitted to Psychiatric Times, which gets to about 50,000 psychiatrists and psychiatric nurses. And the title of it is When a Symptom is Not a Sign. Now, I didn't even know what that meant before I came up with that. A symptom is what I was called into this fellow resident's office. The symptom I had was talking about synchronicity in various ways, astrology, tarot cards. And that's a symptom which psychiatrists, other mental health professionals say is a sign of psychosis. So the reason for the title is that when a symptom is not a sign of psychosis, reconsidering synchronicity. So how do you do that? Well, I've had to do that because I can be called crazy too, because I get caught up in this stuff. So how do you distinguish who's crazy and who's not? Well, in my book, Meaningful Coincidences, which preceded this other one, this life-changing synchronicities, I give several illustrations, and I don't think we have the time to talk about them, about how they can be part of psychosis. Some manic people, when they're manic, see more coincidences. And if you're going too fast when you're manic and you're seeing too many of them, you become overloaded. And the real definition of crazy or not is, can you handle the overload? And a patient that I still remember very vividly telling me all about her coincidences was very, very perplexed. And that's a key word. She couldn't make sense out of them. There were too many of them. So that when you can't make sense out of them, and they start throwing you off, and you start thinking you're crazy because you become crazy because you can't figure out what this means. That's a beginning way of thinking about the differentiation. Can you stand it? But even a person in Ohio, a teacher, who's has 5 coincidences that are dramatic in each week. She wondered if she was crazy. So she came to see me and drove the 1,500 miles, and we met 3 times in 3 days. And I helped her make sense out of the coincidences. And they were trying to tell her, as coincidences might do, is that you got to do something different in your life. It's your subconscious, as you were talking about, unconscious, trying to throw something out at you so you can see it and you can wonder about it and wonder how it's connected with you. If you are doing what she's doing, which is not I'm crazy only, but realizing that Jung wrote about it and then finding my name at a Ohio State football game because she's talking with some guy who mentions that I studied them, which I like that coincidence. She shows up and I help her make sense out of them.
I'm going to ask one final question before we ask for your details and talk a little bit about your own podcast for a moment, if you don't mind. So my last one's kind of a one to leave the audience with some practical wisdom. And it is, if synchronicity is, as Jung suggested, a meeting point between the inner and the outer world, inner and outer world, I had a phone call come through. Then perhaps noticing it as an act of participation in your own journey after decades of studying and experiencing these moments. What would you say to someone who's just starting to notice them? How can they move from being surprised to living in a way that's more aligned with what these moments might be asking of them?
Well, you start with the usual way of interpreting them, which is I am on the right path. That's the most common use of meaningful coincidence. There can be numbers. I had number 23. I don't know if you saw that in one of Crowley's thing, that 23 skidoo meant get out of here. It was like 23 was a number of change. That was my football number. So I was following around. So it was like, okay, these numbers follow me around. So there's something that maybe I'm doing right here. It's like I got a companion. So that's the first use of them. But you find out how you can use them. Talking with somebody who knows something about them is a good idea. Remembering that they're very much like dreams. They're hard to remember. They happen in real life. And I like them better than dreams because their dreams are harder to remember and they're more confusing. The symbolism is more confusing. But that's me. That's what I like. But they're like dreams. So if they capture your attention, read my books or read other people's books or listen to my podcasts that's advertising me. There are plenty of people who talk about meaningful coincidences. I'm probably on the unique side of this because I'm a psychiatrist who was a very good athlete I came out of the conventional wisdom of what we're supposed to be, chairman of psychiatry, doing a lot of research in chest pain and panic disorder. So I'm kind of an expert. A friend of mine put who's the most prominent researcher in spiritual coincidences, synchronicity, came up mostly with me. And ahead of Jung, because I'm more mentioned as currently than is Jung. So I put together a bunch of stuff. And what you referred to, Brandon, earlier, we didn't get to it. There's a list of like how to think about them, principles for how to think about coincidences. Every story has a principle. It has doctor's notes, which are commentary, and principles you can derive. And again, the most prominent principle is our minds are connected with our environments. And you added so well that then that connection can help us individuate, can help us grow, can lead us to where we need to go. Sometimes it's a job, sometimes it's an idea, sometimes it's money, sometimes it's another person. But if you trust them, but keeping in mind they are guideposts, they're suggestions, they're not commands. And people too often think they're commands, they got to do them. And that can be a little bit of problematic because sometimes you got to say it's the trickster. And,
yes.
you can use to have fun with the trickster. I have plenty of times. It messed me up, but I've learned a lot from it too.
Fantastic. And what's the name of your podcast?
Connecting with Coincidence.
Connecting with Coincidence. Very good. And you have a lot of guests on there talking about.
Yeah, I've had about 300 podcasts now. First radio, and then now there's about 200 on YouTube. And I'm drifting away from just talking about synchronicities because I'm looking at how synchronicity can help the world. Right now, you may have noticed, as many people have noticed, that humanity is on a suicidal trajectory. And I'm a psychiatrist, so I try to help people who are suicidal. So I'm trying to get other psychiatrists to do this, and there is one I've made contact with that's doing it. So we can use meaningful coincidences, synchronicity, serendipity, among two others, that can be of assistance to the collective human organism in our evolution to become, as an organism, as humanity, become individuated.
And then where can people find your book and contact information for you if they want to?
All we have to do is put my name in the internet and a Google search, and you'll find my podcast, my Psychology Today posts, and my books, and I forget what else is out there, but there's a lot of other stuff that have been written up. But the podcast and Psychology Today are very informative, and I've written 3 books. The first one called Connecting with Coincidence, the second, Meaningful Coincidences, that's the one with a categorization, and then third is what you and I have been delightfully talking about, is life-changing synchronicities.
Well, thank you very much for coming on my show and talking to me about these things.
You're very welcome, Brandon. I love that you know who Aleister Crowley is.
Thank you for listening. This is a free podcast based upon the value for value model. If you find value in this, or any episode, you can return that value by liking the show, subscribing to this channel, leaving a review, or sharing with a friend on your social media accounts. You can also donate on my website. Thank you again. This is BT for Truth and Shadow Podcast. You are the light in the darkness.
Remember, all I'm offering is the truth, nothing more.